The war had been going on for 3 years. It was long and ugly, and it had no end in sight. Sergeant Elias Voss had been fighting since the start. He was not a big man, and he was not the kind of soldier who talked about glory. He just did his job and kept his squad alive. On the day everything changed, his unit was moving through the ruins of a Cathvar settlement. Their orders said the area was clear. The intelligence was wrong. Shells hit the far side of the street. Smoke filled the air. Elias pressed himself flat against a broken wall and waited for the noise to stop. When it did not stop, he moved forward low and fast, counting his people. That was when he saw the child. It was small, four-limbed, and completely alone. It had pale gray skin and wide black eyes, and it was standing in the middle of the street, frozen with fear as a line of energy fire swept toward it like a burning wave. Elias did not think. He ran. He threw himself over the child and curled his body around it as the strike hit. It tore across his back and his left side. The pain was enormous. He felt his body go heavy, and the world went white at the edges, but he held on. When the smoke cleared, Cathvar soldiers found him lying on the ground, still holding the child against his chest. He was barely breathing. The child was not hurt. The child was not hurt. The soldiers stood over him with weapons raised. They looked at each other. Nobody gave the order to fire. Nobody knew what to do with a man like this, so they carried him inside. They did not know it yet, but that single decision was going to change everything. Kale Mira arrived at the holding compound 3 hours after the incident. She was a matron commander of the Cathvar, and she walked like someone who had never once been afraid of anything. She had been told her daughter was alive and safe. She had also been told, in a very careful and nervous voice, that there was a human prisoner involved. She had not asked questions. She had simply come. The guards at the cell door stepped aside without being asked. Kale Myra stopped in the doorway. Inside the cell, her daughter Yida was sitting on the floor next to the metal bars. On the other side of the bars, the human prisoner was propped against the wall. He was pale and badly hurt, with thick bandaging wrapped around his back and side. He had a fever. She could see it in his eyes. But his eyes were open. And Yida was pressing her small hands to the bars and touching his arm, humming the low, soft tone that Kale Myra had only ever heard her use in her sleep. The human was making sounds back at her, strange, halting sounds. Yida seemed to find them very funny. Kale Myra stood very still for a long moment. She had come ready to be cold, to assess the situation, collect her daughter, and make a decision about the prisoner quickly and without feeling. That was how she handled everything. That was how she had survived this long. But she stood there, and she watched, and something moved in her chest that she did not have a name for. She turned to the head guard. "Bring a healer," she said. The guard stared at her. "For the human?" "Now," she said. The guard left. Nobody argued. Nobody ever argued with Kale Myra. She turned back to the cell. Yida had not even looked up. Elias recovered slowly. The healers said he should not have survived the strike at all. Cathvar medicine was not designed for human bodies, but it kept him alive, and after a week his fever broke, and he could sit up on his own. The Cathvar did not know what to make of him. He did not beg. He did not make threats. He did not throw himself at the walls or shout at the guards. He just sat in his cell, and when Yida came to visit with her small escort of nervous soldiers, he would clap his hands in odd patterns and wait for her to copy them. She always copied them wrong. He always laughed anyway. The scholars came first. They sat outside his cell with their recording tools and watched him for hours. He watched them back and complained. Through a scratchy translation device, a confused medic had left him, that the food was very bad and did something unpleasant to his stomach. Then Kale Myra came alone. She sat across from him and asked him directly, She told him she had watched the incident footage many times. She asked him why he had done it. Elias was quiet for a moment. He looked like he was trying to understand why she was asking. She was little, he said, and she was in the way of something terrible. So I moved. She is the enemy's child, Kael'Myra said. She is nothing to you. He looked at her steadily. She's a kid, he said. That's enough. Kael'Myra had 47 words in her language for different kinds of rage. She had 12 for grief. She had words for honor and duty, and the cold, clean feeling of a decision made correctly. She did not have a word for what she felt sitting across from this injured, stubborn, half-dead human who could not seem to understand why his answer was remarkable. She left without saying anything else. But she came back the next day. Word spread fast. It always did. The Elder Council of the Kethvar called an emergency meeting and sent Kael'Myra a very formal, very urgent message that boiled down to one thing: get rid of the human. He was a political problem. He was a symbol that the enemy could use. He needed to be handed over to military command or removed quietly. At the same time, the human military launched a retrieval operation. They believed Sergeant Voss was either dead or a prisoner of war. They wanted him back. Kael'Myra read both messages. Then she put them down and sat for a long time in the dark of her chamber. She thought about Yitha's hands on the bars. She thought about the man's steady eyes and his simple, impossible answer. She thought about a being that had no reason to move, and had moved anyway. Then she stood up, put on her full ceremonial armor, and walked into the Elder Council chamber. She invoked Kethvara Myral. It was an ancient rite, old as the Dominion itself. It stated that any being who shielded matron blood with their own body became a ward of that bloodline. Protected, bound, under the law of the matron commander herself. It had never been used for a non-Kethvar. It had certainly never been used for an enemy soldier. The Elder Council stared at her. She stared back. Her hand rested on the ceremonial blade at her side, and her posture said very clearly that she was not asking for their opinion. Nobody spoke against her. When Elias was informed of what had happened, through the sputtering translation device, he was quiet for a moment. "What does it mean exactly?" he asked. "Being claimed?" The device offered, "Protected, bound. She is responsible for you now." He looked over at Yitha, who was watching him with enormous black eyes and a very pleased expression. "All right," he said. The ceasefire did not come from diplomats sitting around a table. It came from a legal problem that nobody had expected. Kael'Myra had a human ward now. Under Kethvar law, she was responsible for his safety. That meant she could not continue ordering strikes on human positions without technically putting her own claimed ward in danger. It was an absurd tangle. Lawyers on both sides were working through the night trying to make sense of it. While they worked, the shooting slowed, and then it slowed more. Elias was eventually returned to human territory. He was escorted out with full Kethvar military ceremony, the kind reserved for high-ranking wards of great houses. His commanding officer watched the whole thing with his mouth open. The debrief that followed lasted 11 hours, and none of the official transcripts made any sense at all. The war did not end that day, but something had shifted. A small weight had landed on one side of the scale, and the scale had moved. Kael'Myra began sending messages through quiet channels. She did not call them peace talks. She called them inquiries into the well-being of a ward. The humans who received the messages understood what she meant. From his bunk on a human carrier ship 3 systems away, Elias made a recording. It was him trying to do the clapping game from memory, alone, getting most of it wrong. He sent it to Yitha. She watched it 14 times. Kael'Myra watched it once. She sat in her dark chamber for a long time afterward, not moving, looking at nothing. She had 47 words for rage, 12 for grief, a long list of words for duty, honor, and war. She was beginning to think her language was missing something important. She was beginning to think it needed a new word. Something for the feeling of watching a small and broken thing try very hard, for no reason except that it wanted to. She did not know the word yet, but she thought she would find it eventually.